Welcome to the Exchange Coffee Podcast, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, where coffee people talk to coffee people about coffee and things coffee adjacent. The Exchange is brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey, and produced by Mike Ferguson. This is episode 35, and the topic is entering wholesale. If you're a coffee roaster thinking about starting or expanding a wholesale business, our hosts have thoughts and opinions. So many thoughts and opinions. Todd and Mike recorded this episode in our Providence, Rhode Island studio, while Mark was in our Healdsburg, California office, where our QC team was cupping coffee in the background. Maybe you're like me and you're wondering, will we get through this episode without talking about Mark's garage? What do you think? And now, here they are, Mark and Todd.
Welcome to The Exchange by Kavoya Specialty Coffee. I am your host, Todd Mackey, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Mark Inman. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Todd. How are you? It's been a while since I've talked to you and Mike, and I'm thrilled to be here.
I am also thrilled. And of course, with us, as always, also is our esteemed producer, Mike Ferguson. Mike, how are you today?
Hello.
That's an avoidant answer.
Yes.
I'm good. I'm just paying attention to other stuff.
All good.
I don't
All
actually
good.
listen to you guys during the show. You realize that, right?
Oh, I had no idea. Mark, were you aware?
I assumed he listened to our words and held on with bated breath to
That had never crossed my mind that you might tune all of this out.
Not until
No.
post. I listen and I'm like, why did they say that?
Nice. Well, it is awesome to be back. On the other side of summer, we're on the precipice of fall here, just a couple of days away. And I don't know what that means to you currently in Healdsburg, but out here we are entering just the very best 2 to 3 weeks of the calendar year in the Northeast of the United States. So vibes are through the roof. We are slated to talk about wholesale today.
Yes.
Wholesale roasting, how to garner wholesale accounts. And we've been advised by Mike to kind of pick it up at the very beginning, which from your perspective, Mark, where would you say that is? I mean, let's say someone who has realized I have been roasting coffee in my garage with my 1
I knew you were
kg
going to
roaster.
go there.
And I cannot get enough of standing besides this 1 kg roaster. I need to stand by it more.
Right.
And I need to pack a punch in my sales strategy to get some wholesale accounts. What is step one? Where do we begin? And what is the metric or filter that said hobbyist, now business, small business entrepreneur, what lens should they be looking at this through?
Well, so I could use some real world examples of said garage businesses, and then I will take it to my actual answer. But said garage businesses, so when my son, the original model, as we talked about, was home delivery subscription business. And as he was very young and people were intrigued by what he was doing at such a young age, he started to get approached by wholesale companies to sell the coffee. So in this town, Healdsburg, it was winery tasting rooms where they put packages on the shelf. He had a running store that had a running club, and they were brewing. He had a high caffeine runner's blend and selling bags out of the store. And in the case of my stepchildren, Celia and Quinn, shout out to C. Quinn Coffee, they actually picked up a hotel here in town, another running store, and some winery tasting rooms. So that's people approaching them. Now, in my background as a former wholesale roaster specifically, I think the first question that anyone needs to ask themselves when they talk about wholesale or entering the wholesale world is, what type of wholesaler do you want to be? Because the most of the conversations I tend to have with customers is, well, I just want to get accounts. And it's like, okay, but grocery needs a very specific type of focus as a wholesaler. You need different, trucks and grocery bins, and the pitch to grocery is different than say a restaurant where equipment may play a role, or service or training, or cafes specific that own their own equipment and just want great coffee, or you have breakfast places that are really restaurants as well, that you may have to do a combination of some equipment training, but the volumes are very high. So I think determining the avenue that you want to go for, and I would highly, highly recommend as a first-time wholesaler, do not be a generalist, get into a specific lane and try to master that lane. And you could learn about that lane in your own territory where you see opportunities. Are there more opportunities in grocery, or are there more opportunities in cafes, restaurants, and whatnot?
Sure. Just to satisfy my curiosity, would you share, has Cooper's Coffee ever bumped up against Sequin Coffee in the local wholesale market?
100%, and the tension is high. A lot of very heightened dinner conversations between the two companies, and I have to act as Switzerland in there and try to come to compromise.
Yeah, as a key investor in both, how do you deal with that?
I have no investments in either company. I'm not affiliated in any way. This is the disclaimer.
I thought you were the primary financier, no?
No. Initially with Cooper's I was, but he paid off his initial startup money years ago. Sequin Coffee was started by themselves. They did it on their own. I played... The only role I played was helping them blend, and that was it. They purchased coffee not from me, and I truly stay out of that whole operation.
That must be interesting to watch.
As mediator between those two, because it's not always the smoothest relationship.
Sure. Understood. Yeah, I really latched on to how you said, don't be a generalist.
Right.
And I think how I would have answered the same question to begin is in the spirit of that response, like find your lane, don't be a generalist.
Right.
I think I would have phrased it a little differently, which might be interesting as a launching off point, but I would have said choose or define what is a good wholesale customer.
Right.
Like we're in such an interesting marketplace where even up to importers, we are sort of like in this interesting space that is neither wholly wholesale nor wholly retail, meaning, our brand's value kind of is squishy beyond just a true like cost plus wholesale model. And I think most roasters that I deal with are constantly trying to figure out like, well, what does pricing look like at wholesale? Right. Like what is an appropriate price? And I think, that is a result of this fact. Like, people who their brand plays way more into whether they are a good solution for a particular account, but rather than just being reactive to someone coming into your roastery and saying, hey, we want to buy your coffee and use your coffee, you have to be in a director position and say, hey, a good customer for us has a margin of X or Y. We have a brand placement and visibility of this, and that. And we are set up to serve the breakfast restaurant, the fine dining option, or, maybe it's even better to say, hey, we want a certain percentage of our overall wholesale sales to be constituted from this portion or potential stream, and that one. I think some of the customers that I support at Covoya that were most insulated from the impact of COVID were people that had a broad diversity of wholesale accounts in addition to their retail rather. Sorry. So, I do think deciding when to enter certain spaces, and grocery is a great example of that, where the margins are so narrow, and some of, if you're going to serve a grocer such as Whole Foods, the equipment requirements are significant. You have a baseline of nitro flushing. You have a certain packaging requirement. You have to deal with fills and refills in some cases, depending on how fast your product is moving. These are all really critical questions as to your success as a wholesaler in those spaces. So let's take that and let's make a hypothetical, and then let's dive in a little deeper. Let's say that you've decided that you want a non-traditional wholesale business.
Okay.
Like you're beyond, hey, we've established, historically speaking, for any listeners that are up on our catalog, we've established that the multi-roaster cafe is not a viable, vibrant wholesale business, right?
True. Yes.
So let's say you have struck a line through cafes as your primary proactive target. You are trying to sell into what is lower hanging fruit. Yeah, a more diverse, maybe less obvious type of wholesale market. What comes to mind for you, Mark? You are as creative as they come from a sales perspective. What comes to mind, and how do you chase after it?
Well, so I would say if we were going to focus on cafes as the initial entry point, the ideal wholesaler there is going to have a combination of services, like either you do training, which I do think training is somewhat required nowadays to service cafes. Either selling equipment or repairing equipment is going to put you at an advantage over your competition. And having the product line that the cafe needs. And one of the things I think a lot of people misstep on wholesale, and we'll deal with both categories, but in cafes specifically, is it's easy to, if you have a brand and you have your identity and you want to get that identity out there, and as you're doing sales, you start to get pushback from the customer, like either they're wanting a lower price, or they're wanting something exclusive to them, or they're wanting more micro lots. You could find yourself quickly having the wholesale account define your brand, and you do not want to get in that trap, because it is there's no way out from there. And all of a sudden, you can make all of these concessions in the spirit of picking up wholesale accounts that you lose your identity, and ultimately you'll lose your brand, because people will be confused as to what you stand for, what are you about, what are the original tenets of the company that was created. So if you're a wholesaler who's selling predominantly high-end micro lots, don't apologize for it, and don't, and be upfront with the client. We don't dabble in like a value coffee, or we have a certain price point that we work with, and explain your reasons why, what the producer gets paid, what the quality of the coffee is, the level of care you're putting into it, that justifies the cost. And there are plenty of cafe accounts out there that want to feature very high-end coffee. Now, conversely, there are equal a number of cafes that want comfort food coffee at a good, solid price. And I think somebody that does one step above the standard kind of premium, step above commercial grade, just a little bit higher grade, you could do extremely well in that category if you're creating a well-crafted coffee that tastes solid, that is universally enjoyed, you're not going to extremes, and has a very solid price point. I think you could build a fantastic business doing that. But again, don't be lured into all of a sudden jumping into ultra premium territory, because it's not your focus, and you will undoubtedly fail to people who do focus on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're sort of writing the first chapter of the textbook here for cafe sales. But to circle back, I'm trying to get out of cafe sales and to say,
Okay.
hey, for the ones that want to break the mold, and this is in response to the fact that these are the obvious targets, and with
Right.
the saturation, the number of roasters who have either baseline plus at a good price type of coffee, or fantastic highly traceable, transparent coffees at whatever price they command. Where are the biggest opportunities in wholesale? Like right now, if you were thrust back into the position of roaster sales, roasted coffee sales, like where do you see that opportunity? I'm thinking immediately like institutional coffee, schools,
of course, yes.
churches, other, civic organizations, entities that, at this stage, specialty coffee is big enough and good coffee is popular enough where we've seen companies like Dunkin' or McDonald's dramatically increasing their quality to keep up with the trend, right? And so, a lot of these private and local organizations would love to have a local company as their supplier.
Of course.
And there are tons of great examples from universities to towns and cities, municipal organizations that are buying roasters' coffees. And I wonder how many specialty roasters are actually putting sales calls on these types of groups,
Well, I think in that example, which is a fantastic example, I would say that probably most companies are calling on groups that they're involved in. So if you go to a church, you probably are approaching that church with your idea. If you're a part of Rotary, or if you're a part of, whatever that may be. But as a sales strategy, the example that comes to mind, I'll give you two examples here. The one example that comes to mind as the most successful I've ever seen was Equal Exchange. And Equal Exchange is a company based in Massachusetts out there. They were one of the pioneers of fair trade coffee, and they were having, I was in the organic business and I was up against them a lot, and I was seeing their growth, just staggering growth, but I wasn't seeing it in grocery, I wasn't seeing it in restaurants, and I could not for the life of me figure out how they were growing so quickly. And then I learned after talking to them that what they were doing was they were contracting with like the Baptist Church of America and the Lutheran Church of America, like the parent organization, and going top down. And the argument that they were bringing to the table, which I thought was brilliant, was, look, you're sending people as missionaries into the developing world. And what a wonderful way to carry on that support than by supporting the communities that you're sending these people to. And we work in these small communities, and we sell a product that garners these producers a fair price for their work. And it was a no-brainer. It was an easy sales tactic. And they grew. I mean, the volume, the amount of people that attend churches just as Baptist is enough to build a business. You'd have to have no other account other than that. Now, I'm sure that's all been somewhat pecked away by other people at this point. But back then, it was certainly not an avenue I had ever even considered going down. So you could start at your local church level. And, if you're doing a relationship coffee, or something where it's a micro lot where you have a connection to the community, finding that group that may be either involved as an NGO in that community, or having, visits or retreats in that area, and it's a connection. And people will put their money where their heart is if they're given the option. The second one is what I pursued, and it was more of my annoyance as a newer parent of when my son was in elementary school, of how many times have you get hit up by gift wrap paper, by candy to support this, by, there's always some hokey product that you just gave the money because you just felt obligated to give the school money, but the product that you were purchasing was throwaway. It was meaningless. And so I started approaching the schools of having the children actually sell cans of coffee packaged in a can, and then once a week we would actually show up there in the van, and they could purchase refills, and the school would get $1 per refill in perpetuity. And so the parents then were not feeling obligated to buy some hokey product. They had the option to buy a product that they probably consumed every day, and they were receiving a discount for reusing and refilling a package that I was doing. And I had pretty good success because schools are constantly fundraising. And after I made connections to my son's school, I started hitting up other schools in the region, somewhat in the same vein of using the pitch that Equal Exchange had pioneered. And it was an avenue that I would never have considered if I didn't stumble upon this Equal Exchange story.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wait, can I just confirm, Mark, you sold your coffee in a can?
Yes, I sold it.
Just
I don't know
sure.
if I've ever mentioned that before, but in a
I just wanted to make sure that
steel
anyone
can.
who's listening is tuned in, that they're sure that was the format.
Was always the format.
It was a reusable can.
Yes, and to this day, I still highly support that as a package, as being the greenest packages on the planet. And I was recently in Italy, and love seeing regional roasters packing in steel cans, the vibrancy, the colorfulness of the cans, and people don't throw away cans. You put your change in it when they're empty. You put your crayons in it. I used to, ask people, visualize for me right now, like a community coffee bag. And most people may or may not guess it. But if I said, Mike, Ferguson, who I know knows the answer to this question, tell me some of the striking features of the Hills Brothers can, you would know it instinctively, not because you're coffee's greatest historian, but because your father probably had his nuts and bolts in a Hills Brothers can, or nails or something, and as a child you pass that can a million times and it's been embedded in your psyche. Bags are throwaway, cans are permanent, and that was always my belief.
Can confirm my kids kept their crayons in a tailor-made coffee can.
Raising the next generation of coffee drinkers.
Just like that. Yeah, I literally have cans, coffee cans full of hardware that I have inherited from my grandfather that are on the same workbench,
Yeah, and you won't throw them away.
No. I mean, I have quite a connection with my grandfather, and I painstakingly took apart his workshop in his house and rebuilt it in my own house, according to picture. So there is a certain element there, but those pieces, I mean, it's very true. I mean, there's some wisdom there. So thank you for taking my poke of fun and making a point out of it. All right. So we've talked about a little bit about institutional opportunities. We've talked about the obvious. What are other unconventional wholesale strategies? Or, we can tackle the question of, how to price at wholesale. Right. Because historically speaking, we'd price cost plus. Like, hey, we need to make this much. Here's our operational overhead per pound at our general, capacity or at our general volume, and we need to make such and such number of cents per pound, or dollars per pound, however you like to frame it.
Right.
But more and more, depending on brand cachet and position in the marketplace, I think roasters are finding that it's a bit more retail a model or brand focused a model, being a wholesaler, than it would have been in the past. It's not just a white label type structure. Right. Make me some coffee and sell it to me at a price over what you paid for it.
Right.
What is your anecdotal advice when someone says, well, how do I create a costing model as a wholesale roaster?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is understand all of the costs involved to getting it to the retail customer, the end customer. So in the fact with grocery, what I think a lot of people get stuck on and they make mistakes on is that the grocery store, there's margin and markup. Those are two different numbers. And grocery tacks on anywhere between a 30 to 40% markup. And that from the wholesale price that you're offering. And that bumps that to that's your retail price at shelf. And add to that, if you say are in bulk coffee and you have to provide gravity bins and you have to clean them and refill them or provide a grinder at point of sale, or are you just doing packages on the shelf? Now, as a grocery wholesaler, heavily leaned on bulk sales. Packages back in the day was kind of the starting point to get in your foot in the door. But ultimately, you wanted to be in the bulk coffee because the volumes were staggering. That has somewhat changed over the year, the trend. It's become mostly packaged coffees at grocery. So there's going to be things like demos that you're going to be required to do by the stores, sales that you're going to be required to offer either quarterly or monthly. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, the initial free fill of getting your foot in the door. Those are costs that you need to factor in. But traditionally, if you establish that you can hit a price point in the grocery store that's competitive with everybody else, ideally, I always wanted a margin that was comparable to or better than the other avenues I was in. So if I was a retail cafe and I was netting 18% on my business, I wanted to at least make 18 because that made it worth my while. You don't want to go below because then it's just taking away from your primary focus. So you want to stick with the percentage net profit that you want to make out of that sale, and that has to work for you. And that includes all those things that they tick off because they're going to constantly peck away at that margin, and you have got to hold your ground because many people acquiesce to all these requests and then they find themselves very quickly in a break-even business.
Agreed.
Now, in a retail, like if you are in a wholesale restaurant or cafe setting, it's slightly different. And, back in the day out here in the West Coast, I don't know the East Coast situation, but what was happening was if you wanted to get into a restaurant per se, the restaurant would say, okay, well, we need a brewer, we need the carafes, we need a grinder, we need a hot water tower, and that's provided for free by the current wholesale supplier. So you're going to have to match that. And so you're forced into a initial cost that's pretty steep, and you have to weigh the volume that account then does and understand the equipment will probably have to be replaced every 2 years. And does that volume work with those realities? And in many cases, and then the other thing you need to keep in mind is don't use the benchmark of, well, I've taken care of my brewer for 5 years in my cafe and they could last a lot longer than 2. Understand this universal truth that when a restaurant or a cafe gets a piece of free equipment, they no longer feel obligated to care for said equipment. That becomes your problem as the wholesaler. And the abuse that these machines take, they get just brutalized. And then wholesalers end up buying usually the most budget-friendly option to get in there. And it was a trap because what was happening was this person gave me a brewer and a grinder. Can you do a brewer grinder water tower? Now this person's giving me an espresso machine. And, it's like this endless cycle that before you know it, you're buying the cafe. And I was always use the argument of, does the meat provider buy the oven and the grill for the restaurant? No, they don't. They're just selling the meat. They're not getting into that minutia. So the way I got around that was to present 2 options to the wholesale customer. If I buy this equipment for you, based on your volume, this is the price per pound I need to have to make a profit, pay for my equipment, and you need to stick with me for a certain time. And they would sign an agreement. If you canceled me for whatever reason, you had to buy me out of the equipment contract, and then you could do whatever you want. Or you could, and I was selling equipment at the time, you could buy a machine of your choice, as nice as you want to go, at my cost, and then you're going to get a cheaper price on the coffee. When they purchased like the La Marzocco or the whatever the insert machine name in there, the Clover or whatever, they took care of that equipment. The equipment lasted, and they perceived the cheaper price of the green coffee worth their while. So there's a lot more finesse and math that's going to go into the cafe and restaurant side of the wholesale business than grocery. Grocery is pretty straightforward and easy to calculate until you get into distribution. Then there's a whole nother level.
Yeah, see, you're going to have to buy me out of the contract. I get
Exactly.
it. I get it. Believe me, been there many times.
And how did things work on the East Coast? Because I'm assuming that it wasn't always the same situation.
No, but the same, yeah. It's interesting because if you look at like specialty coffee from a roast profile perspective, East Coast, West Coast, different worlds, from roast profile or,
Sure.
like typical blend components or like origin breakup across volume,
Right.
they're very, very different. But one thing is for sure, when you look at wholesale and restaurant cafe, historically speaking, equipment has been the key. And when training came on the scene, we would say training is the new equipment. Right.
Right.
And it was the segue that loosened up the expectation that a cafe would buy or not buy equipment. It was, no, you buy equipment, but what you get is wholesale training and education. And, I think on the East Coast, certainly Counterculture was the first company to really set down a model that centered, training centers, like literal storefronts that were not publicly facing per se, but were faced towards the wholesale, potential wholesale customer as educational centers for coffee quality. And it allowed a way out of, furnishing equipment in a more broad sense. But
still a significant cost to the company.
a huge cost and an ongoing cost.
Right.
Compared to something that was a one-time cost that, from a business owner or stakeholder perspective, you can see why having an equipment write-down on your balance sheet is a good thing, right? So there's an easier way of kind of justifying that. So it's interesting. I mean, there are lots of different perspectives you can play there. I do want to shift gears, as I often do here, and talk about white label, private label, or establishing customer brands and labeling coffee for them. However you prefer to talk about this space. My question to Mark Inman right now is it good wholesale business? And what does it need to have for it to be good wholesale business?
Right. So I would argue, and as you know, I love to make the preposterous statement and then work my way backwards from it, is that this particular segment that you're now touching on is the most lucrative segment at this day and age in wholesale coffee.
Holy hell. You're saying this right now. You're saying what I think you're saying.
100%. If you have the setup in your business to offer that service, that is the best place to be. And I would even take it one step further. There is an argument to be made to, unless your brand is doing really well, put your brand aside and become specifically and exclusively a white label and co-packer roasting facility. I have worked in and around many consultants over the past, this is a recent thing. So over the past, I would say 2 years. And so back in the day, the investor group, the venture capital world, they were looking for a retail presence in a certain geography, and VC raced to that. And then they raced to La Colombe with cold brew, and that was what it was. Then it turned into, how big is your mailing list? That became very interesting, where people were investing in the potentiality of mail order coffee on a subscription-based service, and that was the new cachet. And retail was almost not as important. That used to be everything to have retail presence. And now these large investment capital groups have tapped into the idea post-COVID that everybody wants to create a brand. The barrier to entry to start a roasted brand is so much higher than it was when I got into it, that it behooves you to really look at going to a white label person first to do your manufacturing. And you focus on brand building, sourcing your green, making your blends, the intellectual property. But the actual manufacturing and packaging is an expense you don't want it to absorb. And they're dumping large sums of money into state-of-the-art facilities to offer just that service. And going back into the day, this, the prophecy that is Rob Stephen, when I was a wee lad, Rob, and I had, Rob would come visit my roasting plant. He once said to me, he goes, "You realize there's nothing interesting about you roasting. You're just browning beans." And I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? I was like wildly offended by that statement. And what he then took it one step further to explain was the value in your brand, if somebody buys your brand, is in the brand and your wholesale accounts. They don't want your facility. They don't want your roaster. They don't want that. That's of no value. All of the value is in your brand. So if you were to focus all of your, the income or the investment money that you have into something, it is brand, sales, accounts, offload that. And at the time, the statistic was that there was, and Mike will correct us on this, I know he will, but it was like there was 80% capacity out there to have your coffee roasted by somebody else. That the U.S. manufacturing of coffee wasn't even at 20%. And so there's 80% potential to negotiate good pricing wherever you were regionally in the U.S. That now has, with the Food Safety Modernization Act and new requirements on manufacturing a packaged product, it's extremely expensive to build a roasting plant now. And but it takes a certain level of capital to create that type of an avenue. It's not for the average person. It's for somebody who has access to deeper pockets than they normally would.
Well, that and the cost per pound, the biggest savings lever is capacity, is volume. Right. So even if you can get in a small step, even if you can get the 1 kg roaster, there's no way to lower your overhead costs and compete in the wholesale space until you have the 70 kg roaster.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say 2.
And all of this, of course, if it weren't obvious already, leads us to talk about regenerative organic certified coffee. Does it not?
Wait a minute, what? I just got dizzy.
No.
Well,
it doesn't in particular, but it does.
Where I thought you were taking this conversation was this leads us to the step in between, which is the co-row facility for those trying to get in. That's the third avenue.
Yeah, but that's certainly something that could be discussed here. I mean, I was joking about regenerative just in that, as time has continued to go on and traveling to Colombia last week and talking quite a lot with partners upstream there. My excitement just continues to grow. So I'd be remiss not to just 100%. Let my heart spill out in this moment for any good excuse to talk about it. But yeah, we could talk about co-roasting. I think, we're being a wholesale focused episode and wanting to keep in our lane, as you so encouraged and charged us at the top of the hour.
Right.
We'll forego, but yeah, I guess, from your perspective, where are we? Are we kind of landing the plane? Have we talked about all the avenues one can inspect for finding wholesale outlets for roasted coffee, or, are there more?
Well, I mean, there's obviously plenty more out there. The only other one that's kind of an obvious come to mind, and I had a significant amount of these out here, were tech companies. In West Coast, everybody wants to be in Google and they want to be in Apple, and and I was in Birkenstock's factory and Agilent Technologies and these large scale industrial companies that had multiple floors and coffee stations galore, and usually giving free coffee to their staff of thousands. It is a massive wholesale opportunity for a roaster, understanding that in the case of Google and I believe Apple, you get a piece of the action for a certain length of time, and they're constantly rotating brands. And people do that to ideally get those employees to buy that coffee mail order after the fact. But in the case of where I had Agilent, it was I think it was 24 coffee brewing stations I had to pay for and install, and they were open 24 hours a day, and I was doing about 1,000 pounds a month wholesale. Because they were giving the coffee away and not selling it, it was, the there wasn't as much of a conversation about cost because they had to get to some retail price. It was it reasonable for their staff? Did it have a story behind it that they can feel good about serving for free to their clientele? And the onus on me at that point was literally a 24/7 repair person, because if anything went wrong, they had to be up and running then. It wasn't like I'll come tomorrow or a week later. So there was a significant commitment. There was a significant barrier to the entry, which was buying the initial equipment. But once you were in, it was golden as long as you kept everything running smoothly.
Sort of circle back just a little bit and talk about the very small roaster. They're selling online, maybe has subscription service, and they're a friend of yours, and they say, hey, I want to start selling wholesale next week. What does that week look like? I mean, like, so I'll give you an example of one of they have to turn on their coffee radar and look, coffee's everywhere, and you have to start seeing it everywhere that it is. So when you're out and about, you're noticing, now you've turned that switch so that you're noticing all the places that coffee exists in the world. And is there a way for you to get to that place? So that would be like my first piece of advice. But what else? What's that week going to look like?
Okay, so Todd could pick it up with, again, poking fun at the 1 kilo roaster who now wants to go out and look.
When was I poking fun? That's a callback. That's a callback.
You could do another callback, and that's the leaping off point for that 1 week. That's a
sure.
Okay.
So you're looking to find coffee wherever it lies. I'm sort of enamored by that, Mike. I think that's awesome. I mean, what a lot of people probably, may not know is Mike's tenure as business development director of Baddorf and Bronson, doing exactly that, right? Looking at every opportunity that coffee is out there. I think I'm drawing a blank beyond that.
Okay, so not every opportunity is one, right? So the first thing we'd say is don't walk into a coffee house, that's been using the same roaster for 5 years and start cold calling the barista who's not going to make the decision anyway.
Right.
So the little things like that advice that you'd give somebody over dinner who's wants to start doing wholesale, good, whether things you should do or shouldn't do, if they're going to be hitting the pavement next week or hitting in the old days, we'd call the yellow pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I'd recommend, if I may, now that my gears are greased, thank you, Mike, is to recognize that the pounding the pavement is not the pavement. It looks different than that. And I think that it's a relational business in every way, shape, and form in most cases. And just having a coffee product and finding a coffee buyer is not necessarily grounds, pun intended, for a good sales and purchase relationship. I think, one thing that has served me as someone in roasted coffee sales and in green coffee sales is being a part of a community in a proactive way and investing as a thought leader and as someone who desired to be an expert and has become in some few ways, being involved in a trade association, being involved in local groups and associations. And to your point earlier, organizations that you're a part of are whether schools, social groups, et cetera, they can be, obvious low-hanging fruit for like where it might make sense. I immediately think of a local roaster here in Providence called Borealis Coffee, and Brian, who started Borealis Coffee, has long been in the filmmaking business, for audio. And, the way that company started was this person who, I'll joke and say, had a 1 kilo roaster in his garage. I don't believe that's true, but like essentially was a home roaster who wanted to make coffee for the crew. And still some of his like core business, like by percentage and by, identity is, the Team Crafty blend, which goes out to the same crew and others, which was the coffee that he essentially established his whole business on to begin. And that was hey, there is, of course, people working around the clock, like doing the rigging, managing the audio rigs and setups for these types of shoots. And let's dedicate something very special and engineer something very special for them in this context, right? So I think like where you are, the community, like what you're involved in. I think if you're involved in the wider specialty coffee community, some of these relationships form up just in obvious and natural ways where you're just like, shoulder to shoulder getting quote unquote stuff done. And because you enjoy working with these people and you build a tremendous amount of trust being involved in, I look back to involvement in the Roasters Guild and the Barista Guild, and, you essentially create a trusted relationship before you even buy and sell anything. And that's the best possible outcome to establish a sales relationship on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, getting to the nuts and bolts of getting started as well, outside of an internal connection like that, like if you're just out trying to develop a foothold in your community, that, it's truly understanding the opportunity that's there and having your package down. You have to go in with what is it that you're selling aside from the coffee, what you're offering. And the best way to know what you're up against is to ask around what's the current deals out there. Are people giving away equipment if it's a cafe? Are they providing training? Are these things requirements or nice to haves? And once you are able to craft what your offering is going to be, have that be the highlight. The coffee is an important conversation, but with wholesale, it's everything around the coffee that's equally as important. Can you do emergency deliveries if they have a rush? Like a Easter brunch weekend, that you're not out and gone if they're running out of coffee, that you're able to get it to them quickly. Do you have the ability to do repairs late hours? Do you do training, more often than say annually if they hire new employees? Those are the little hooks that ensure your business. I would say don't offer your entire product line. Specifically target coffees that are good wholesale coffees to have a concise package that you're offering. Of course, you could always expand from there, but keep that package concise so you're not getting too spread out too quickly in your wholesale move.
Yeah, we used to always say go where your customers are, but that doesn't mean their location. Don't go to the coffee house, don't go to the restaurant.
Right.
Where else are they? So restaurateurs, they hang out. Like restaurant owners hang out and they do events, and whatever they're doing to promote their business, that's probably an event that you can be a part of too. So if they're giving away samples at some charity event, you give away samples at that same charity event. Cool, guys. Thanks a lot.
Well, Mike called it at the end of the show.
Cue the music.
Last thoughts?
Todd, you want to take us out? Yeah, last thoughts and take us out, Todd.
It's despite the crowding, like wholesale is a necessary part of the business. I mean, I think 100%. You have to do wholesale in some way, shape, or form to have a growing future in specialty coffee. And the biggest charge that I try to recommend to the customers, the roaster customers that I work with here at Kovoya, is to get creative and to see the places that are not the most obvious, because that is where, the type of room for growth that you're looking for is. Some of the well-trodden paths are such because everyone is trying to get in that proverbial door. And it pays to kind of look left and look right. But yeah, that's all I have, Mark. I don't know if you have any anecdotal things to finish with. I know I brought us in. I meant to be a little cheeky in doing so because that's typically been your thing. That may be the first of its kind, may not be the last, but I don't want to take away the opportunity for you to sort of roll the credits, as it were, and give our listeners an official Mark Inman outro. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, the first thing, I had a question for the two of you as we outro, because I love this subject. I love talking about it. It's the one thing that will always pique my interest. And the two of you have been in this world before as well. And whenever I find myself engaged in this conversation, I have this melancholy pull. Like, I miss doing wholesale. I really miss it. It's one of the probably the strongest pulls I have in coffee to this day. And what is, like, do you guys miss that world? I mean, you guys are now into different things, but I mean, we both work, for some great wholesale companies. I mean, what are your thoughts?
What I miss is the roasted coffee environment.
Yeah.
And just about everything about it. I mean, just walking through the roastery, I miss.
Yeah.
Going over and standing next to the roaster and watching them roast coffee. What I really miss is giving roastery tours. That was absolutely my favorite thing. We had a really, decent sized roastery. People are always fascinated by the magic that happens, in the roastery. And then walking this sort of thing and keeping your coffee radar up, just walking around town, driving around town and looking for where the coffee is found. I always enjoyed that. And then asking questions. Whenever you found coffee, it was like, how did this coffee get here?
Right.
Sometimes you find coffee in the oddest place. I mean, Mark, you've sort of got this reputation, of finding distribution channels that nobody else thought of to explore. And so I miss that too.
Yeah.
My answer is quite different. Not at all. Not at all. I do not miss it.
Really?
No, I'm being extreme. That's hyperbolic, but I do, through the lens of the roastery tours, public cuppings, demonstrations, even, even in grocery settings. Like, I would have so much fun. I used to when we would sell into Whole Foods and do demonstrations, right. I used to bring all sorts of techie, scientific stuff, thermocouples that I would put in, dripper beds. And I mean, people would look over and it was just freakish in a way, but it was so fun to reframe, especially at that time. I mean, 15 plus years ago now,
right.
How people thought about coffee. I loved that. And, what I think I don't miss in any way, shape, or form is the typical wholesale roasted coffee buyer is buying from one outlet. And I actually really like being in a sales environment where there is it's not the assumption that you buy from one company, right?
Right.
I like being in a competitive landscape where there is openness to, hey, a good offer that's coming through this channel versus that. It's more fluid that way. That energizes me. Not even so much in an ongoing competitive type of, hey, I'm gonna beat this, this person or that company. But it just feels less restrictive. I found that wholesale sales, in that space, that's a really hard. It takes a very special type of salesperson, very special personality,
right?
And those aspects to me were more grating. It was more difficult. I found that to be very tiring. But yeah, I mean, the roastery itself and engaging how people saw coffee, like finished roasted coffee, is endlessly romantic to me.
Right. So my outro goes out to you, the wholesale roaster listener out there that's been very loyal to the exchange since we started it way back. Just remember that there are many days when you're working where it just seems like having this business is a nightmare. It's hard. You got people coming in late. You've got, the coffee truck didn't show up on time and you're scrambling orders at the middle of the night and all of the stress of being a small business owner. But there will come a day, and I guarantee you there will come a day that you may sell the company or you may move on to something else, but you will forever romanticize your days as a wholesale roaster, and that will never go away.
You've been listening to the Exchange Coffee Podcast, part of the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network, brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee. The Exchange is hosted by Mark Inman and Todd Mackey and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. Our free use theme music for this episode was How to Build It by Paolo Argento. Remember, you can always email me with questions, thoughts, or concerns about the dinner table tension at Mark's house at mike.ferguson@kavoya.com. Thanks for listening, and now your postscript.
You almost had me in tears at the end there. My God. Spreading it thick.
We have to expand the emotional range here. It just can't all be yucks and jokes. It's
Yucks. I've never heard that. Awesome.